I'm going to show you another King's Indian defence. I've been rather inspired by the games I was looking at from the European Championship with this opening, and I've gone a little deeper into one of the games, the game between Semenenkov and Ivanchuk, which, if you remember, finished dramatically with a victory for Ivanchuk playing black. And I found another game in exactly this line. So this is Rajat Makkar, who's from France, against Azarya Setyaki from Indonesia. This was played in Budapest just at the beginning of December, actually, not so long ago. So this is exactly the same as the Semenenkov-Ivanchuk game that I showed on the channel. Well, not a few days ago, really. So we have this locked pawn structure, which makes life very interesting because closed in the middle, but that means that both sides are trying to open the position. Now, traditionally, black often goes for the f5 break, but actually in this position, once white plays g4, it's clear that f5 is going to be difficult to achieve, or it's going to open up black's position. So, in fact, black looks for play on the other side of the board. But sometimes that switches. Sometimes black breaks on the king side. Sometimes it's white that breaks on the queen side. So it's a really tense position. And f3 supporting this pawn. And this knight swings round to g3. Bishop d7 covers these important squares. Knight g3, a4. So black is starting to claim territory on the queen side. And white rumbles forward on the king side. Queen a5. Now, here is where Semenenkov played g5. If you want to catch up with that video, if you want to remind yourself, then check out the link down below, and you can play through that game. G5 is not a bad move. The game went like this, and this was incredibly tense actually, with Ivanchuk eventually coming good, but white was certainly well in the game. But instead of G5 here, Makkar plays H5, which has been quite a popular move actually. Well, relatively popular in this position. Now, how should black proceed? White is basically just carrying on with this attack, sometimes looking to play bishop h6 and just exchange here and attack down the h-file. Sometimes just exchanging here on g6 and switching over with queen h2. Sometimes just closing the king side with h6. It really depends how black plays. But here black plays rook fc8. Now that does potentially give the king a flight square. That's one thing. And of course starts to increase pressure on the c-file. Now white decides to just exchange. h6 isn't going to be so good here because the bishop can come out straight away. So white exchanges here. H takes g6, bishop h6 is really dangerous for black. It's much better to keep the h-file, well, relatively closed here. g5 played, so this is getting quite serious for black. In this case, knight h5 not very good. That'll well, the h-file doesn't is open basically, so the knight goes back here. And this is such a difficult position already. There's a very obvious move for white here, namely queen h2. This wasn't played because white is already crashing through, but this is highly unclear because in this position, in fact, well, white breaks through here, but there's no obvious follow-up. And there are issues here for white to solve. So white plays here a very clever move actually, which is quite often seen in this continuation as a whole. Rook B1. That means that if black plays a3 to undermine the knight, then b4 is obviously winning material. So that's the idea of rook b1. I should say there's another way to play this position, and that's to go for a queen exchange. If white wants to take some of the heat out of the position, then knight d1 is possible. Now it's a very different kind of game. You can see that white has succeeded in cramping black on the king side, but black certainly has counterplay on the other side of the board. Then again, white has a nice space advantage. It's a completely open position. White has to watch out for moves like this, or maybe simply advancing. It's really tricky, but that is another quite legitimate way for white to play. Anyway, rook b1 played. I mean, I do like this move because it's seeks to basically nip black's counterplay in the bud. And here black plays knight c7. b5 is also possible with this idea. And this is unbelievably sharp. Again, letting white break through. But black has a lot of counterplay here. There's a check and this can be taken. All bets are off, basically. But knight c7 played, and now queen h2. And clearly black can't hold this one, so king f7. Right. Here is where I'd like you to have a little think. I'll have my customary drink. It's tea time, folks. Cheers. You have a think how you'd like to play with white. White to play. So it's a very strange position. What would you do here? There's probably more than one good move. One thing is, don't take on h7, because that loses the queen. That's rather embarrassing. It's funny because white's play is quite one-dimensional, actually. If white doesn't succeed in breaking through here, well, what exactly is white doing? Because the king is in the middle. Black is building up serious pressure here. This knight is about to fly in, or potentially b5, b4. If bishop h3, that's an interesting move. Because white can sometimes use this diagonal. Supposing, for example, black would take here, then it might be possible to take and check here. Rook h8 keeps black in the game, but bishop h3 is not bad. It's nice to distract black. But there is a much stronger move here, which certainly makes sense of that knight on g3. If this knight isn't used quickly, then it's going to look very stupid because these squares are controlled. So knight f5 is actually very powerful. So really that has to be taken because this is loose, this is loose. So pawn takes, and here is the clever follow-up. Queen h7 is still losing after this. The queen is trapped. But white flicks in queen h5. I suspect this was missed by black. And this is incredibly powerful. If the king steps back, then g6 just makes the breakthrough. And it's going to be impossible to defend this position. So king e7 played. Now, this is still a very tricky position. And white gets it wrong. White played g6, just looking to break through. In fact, after this move, black is winning. And this blocks the position. Because if bishop takes, then rook takes. And again, the queen finds itself in a very embarrassing position. If queen check, then bishop f6. So keeps the position more or less closed. And bishop g5 check, king here, and you can see the queen is trapped. And that sacrifice, I'm afraid, doesn't help. So incredibly, after g6, h6 should be winning for black. That wasn't played. Okay, so instead of g6, g6 is a mistake. What should white play? Well, in fact, queen h7 is strong. Now that rook h8 is no longer possible because the bishop hangs, then rook g8, pawn takes, and this is too strong. That's obviously a threat. Now, this isn't yet over. But let's see, what's the material count? White is a pawn up. Rook h7 is potentially on the cards. Well, black's queenside counterplay has just about been quelled, so it should be good for white. So g6 played instead. As I said, h6 is a winning move, incredibly. Black played f4, which doesn't look bad because it seeks to shut out the bishop. But that's a winning move. And, well, if bishop here, then rook takes pawn check, so the king step back. Pawn takes pawn, and white is breaking through. So if bishop h8, then the bishop can just drop back, actually. White's piece down, but it doesn't matter. These pieces are heading into the position. There's queen check, bishop h4, for example. King f7 played, queen h5 check. King's in massive trouble. Rook g1, threatening that one. Queen h6. Threat is to play rook g7. So, for example, if pawn takes bishop, this didn't happen, folks. But I think this one is quite clear. That's mate. Instead, knight e8. So that at least covers the g7 square, but now the bishop just drops back. So there's even potentially threats here. Queen b4 and rook g6 is a very nice way to finish off, because now the threat is to take here and queen g7 check. And that will win in a similar way to we've seen before. Bishop h8 and rook g8 was the final move. Threatening the bishop, for example, yeah, it's fatal. There really is no way out. For example, let me show one possible variation. So knight here, rook check. If the king retreats, then queen takes, and if bishop takes here, and yeah, we're gonna get a queen and take here, and that's the end of that. So yeah, that was the final position. I think once again this shows that games with the King's Indian can often turn on one move. There were some nice ideas here. Knight f5 is a beautiful move, actually very typical in this kind of variation. It just sort of opens up the position. And yes, later on, when it looked like white is just breaking through very easily, in fact, g6 was a mistake. But, well, all's well that ends well. So there you go. It's just another way for white to play. Instead of g5, h5. And, well, that just opens a very different can of worms, basically. It's still incredibly difficult. I'm going to show you another King's Indian in my next video, or, well, video in a few days' time anyway, because I'm really enjoying covering these kind of positions. Don't forget, if you want to support the channel, then do check out PayPal or Patreon. We would very much appreciate your support. Thanks